Hi, everybody. Welcome to another night of explorations into the nature of consciousness. Um, I hope everybody is doing well and you're ready for another interesting night as we dive more deeply into the nature of consciousness. Okay, so in the past, you probably heard me talk about the default mode network in the brain. Um, This is going to become important when we start looking at the evidence for materialism versus alternative metaphysics, which describe the nature of awareness and consciousness. And just to repeat, the default mode network, DMN, is the way it's normally referred to, is a large-scale network of the brain that becomes active when you're awake, but you're not focused on the outside world. In other words, you're not using your perceptual mechanisms. If you look at the diagram on the right, you can see that the areas in purple represent the different areas in the brain that are usually active when the default mode network is active. Now, the areas in blue are those areas that are involved in external perception, particularly focused visual attention. So the default mode network is most active when the mind is wandering, when you're daydreaming, when you're self-reflecting, when you're thinking about the past or you're thinking about the future. And the default mode network decreases, when you're paying attention to demanding externally focused tasks that require sustained attention and you're using a perceptual mechanism. Now, interestingly enough, the default mode network also reduces during altered states of consciousness, as in deep meditation, also brought about by the use of psychedelics and transpersonal experiences. So we're going to experience an increase right now in the default mode network. We're going to do a little meditation, and you'll get to experience the default mode network in action. So everybody get comfortable. If you're ready, this is a little 10-minute meditation. Just close your eyes, relax, take a few deep breaths, and enjoy the meditations. I'll see you in 10 minutes.
Begin by getting into whatever position makes you feel best right now. Lovingly closing your beautiful eyes whenever you feel ready. And tuning into your own awareness of your breath and body. Inviting the breath to flow freely through you. And inviting the body to relax as it does. Saying to yourself in this moment, "Dear self, I have nothing else for you to do right now, except to simply be here. This is our time together to relax, to be still, to feel a sense of oneness and presence. You feel yourself inviting all of your awareness into this moment. feeling lighter and freer with every relaxed breath. There's nothing you need to do right now. All is well in this moment. And as you get that gentle sense of all being well, you begin to envision before you lies a wide open space of some kind, bridged by a rainbow. From this angle, it almost looks as if it is glowing from the inside, radiating light outward like a neon sign. And your feet feel so called to be on that bridge right now. With a playful innocence in your heart, you see yourself heading towards the bridge. Perhaps you see your feet as barefoot as you step on the bridge. Trust how your imagination sees this, and either way, sense the energy. Making your way to the very center of the bridge. Take a look above you. What is the sky like right now? As you feel yourself in the center of this bridge of light, a vortex begins to open up at your feet. Wrapping up your entire body from the soles of your feet to the top of your head. Rotating all around you. Cleansing and clearing away any energetic debris. Allowing you to be lighter, freer, more present and in this moment. And as you breathe and relax into this, that vortex of light begins to dissipate. And you feel your connection to the bridge again. This time, feeling even more strongly synced up with this energy. You are being guided to a new chapter in your life. The time is now to cross over into that threshold. Let the idea of crossing over into this threshold feel like just simply taking another breath. And what's interesting is that when you feel ready to cross over this bridge completely, you suddenly grow wings out of your back. Let yourself see what size and shape and color they are right now. And you feel them lifting you up off of this rainbow. And you begin to fly freely. Flying as high as you'd like to imagine. Letting your subconscious know that the idea of getting from one place to another can be much more freer now. Let yourself identify a celestial body, whatever comes to mind right now, whether it's the sun, the moon, a star, a planet, or something else entirely. Trust where your imagination has landed and see yourself flying there. And when you get there, you see that there is a place for you to sit that is unique to you in this moment. And there is a gift waiting for you here. What is it? What do you see? Imagine yourself placing that gift in your heart, feeling the energy of receiving it, and then take your seat. Letting yourself soak in the awareness that entering this next chapter can be just as easy and miraculous, just as playful and free, natural, gentle, easy, and delightful. Take a big, deep breath in, letting these feelings build as you hold your breath at the top. And when you're ready, let them go with a powerful sigh. And as your breath returns to its regular pace, you sense yourself returning to where you are in this time and space. Connected to that feeling of having just crossed over into a new threshold for your greatest good in accordance with the greatest good of all. Say thank you to yourself for this. Carrying this feeling and awareness with you as you very slowly take your time, letting your body move slowly and gently as it feels called, and opening your eyes only when you're ready. Amazing job today.
Okay, welcome back. Um, Introspection is what the ancients have been telling us for 3,500 years. They've been doing to study the nature of consciousness. We'll have a lot more to talk about default mode network and other aspects of brain activity. But please remember, as I've been saying all along, correlation is not the same as causation. So we'll talk more about that as well. Okay, so let's talk about raw phenomenal consciousness for a moment. Um, as a matter of fact, and when I mean it like that, experience and consciousness, a phenomenal consciousness, are really synonymous. And it's very interesting. When you walk into a room, for example, the experience you have of the room is unitary and holistic. If you walk into the room and as soon as you step inside, I tell you to close your eyes. Now imagine what you just saw. You will see the room and everything in its entirety. Now, of course, you may not see all the details, but it's amazing how much that you all take in at once. It's not in individual pieces or compartments. It's a unitary experience and it's a holistic experience. Okay. Um, I've talked before that experience has agency. It exists for itself, um, you know, or for others for that matter, but certainly for itself. It can influence its own behavior and or its own states, I should say, as well as other states external to itself. Uh, and the excitations are self-activating. It doesn't necessarily require something from the outside to activate a thought that comes into your mind. Just think back to the meditation exercise we just went through. And of course, it can also be influenced by other states, either internal or external states. For example, if you think of a balloon, the next thing you may think of is a birthday party. And if you think of a birthday party, well, maybe then you'll think of you as a 5-year-old, celebrating your birthday with all your friends over and lots of exciting presents waiting to be unwrapped. So remember, there's three aspects to experience. Uh, there's the experience or, that's you, or experiencer, I should say. There's the experience itself, the thing that's being experienced, and what is experience or the experience and the experiencing, the process of experiencing. Okay, sorry, I got it right this time. Consciousness is kind of unusual in that it doesn't take anything external to um, activate it. Think of a guitar laying on a table in your house, and all of a sudden the strings just randomly start vibrating. That's what I mean by self-activating. It doesn't take another guitar string in another room to start vibrating before the one on the table starts vibrating. It just happens on its own. So it influences itself or is influenced by something external to itself. The last thing I'll say about phenomenal consciousness, it's a state of being, what something feels like this, the feeling of love, the beauty of a sunset, the taste of a strawberry, and it is not a computation. Uh, Computation is something that's done with intelligence, and we will talk more about that in the future as well. So, obviously, there's different levels of consciousness, whether we're talking about metaconsciousness, which is self-reflective consciousness, um, or phenomenal consciousness, where we're talking just about pure states of experience. Um, all these are on the spectrum of what I mean by consciousness, and I have a chart that will explain this in just a minute. Okay, so let's talk about one of my favorite things is, oops, there we go, transcendent consciousness or mystical consciousness. Um, what happens when somebody passes over onto the left side? Um, you reach a state of consciousness which is not self-referential. It's egoless and formless. You don't associate with a body. And many people who reach the transcendent or mystical state will say that it's boundless in space and time. In other words, it's beyond space and time. There is no time, there is no space. That space and times are constructs of consciousness that allow us to exist when we're in the ego state. People who reach a transcendent state will also say that you have this knowing that you understand everything. And of course, when you leave that state and come back to the ordinary state of consciousness, you lose that knowingness, but you remember that you had the experience of knowing. It's also a feeling of oneness, of interconnectedness, that everything is all part of one grand thing. and that thing which I like to call the cosmic consciousness. And the other thing is it brings a feeling of profound peace, bliss, and joy. And I can tell you from firsthand experience, as you'll see in a minute, um, how profound those things are. And how do you get into a state like that? Well, one way is deep meditation, although that's difficult. It takes many years of practice. Um, there are other ways. Edgar Mitchell, the Apollo 14 astronaut that I talked about before, achieved it by seeing things from a totally different perspective, and that is looking at the Earth from space. And as the spaceship was rotating around, so it maintained thermal balance on all sides of the spaceship as it was coming back from the moon towards Earth. First, he saw the Earth, then the moon, then the blackness of space, and then the sun. And it kept repeating every 90 seconds, however fast the spaceship was rotating on its axis to maintain the equal heating on all sides of the spacecraft. Through those continuous changes in perspective, he reached an altered state of consciousness from that. And it was so profound for him, that's why he came back and formed the Institute of Noetic Sciences to investigate the nature of consciousness. Um, People have reached these altered states through experiences like near-death experiences, out-of-body experiences, and I mentioned some others, like if somebody has an inoperable tumor, for example, they used to be inoperable and it was clearly a death sentence, or an aneurysm in the brain, let's say. Because if you tried to surgically remove it or repair it, you would bleed out so fast that they couldn't stop the blood in time and you would be done. They invented a procedure in the late 1980s called standstill surgery, where they connect the patient up to a heart-lung machine, cool the blood down, and they're monitoring the EEG through an EEG cap at the same time. And when the brain waves stop, when the body is cool enough and the blood has been drained from the body, um, then they can operate. And obviously, there's absolutely no brain activity when those states occur. It's called standstill surgery. It's not too common, but that surgery is practiced on a regular basis for a certain percentage of patients. Anyways, when they come back, they talk about incredible experiences, very similar to what it's like when you have a near-death experience. And of course, the other way you can have a transcendent experience is through psychedelics. And there's a number of other techniques also. Stan Groff, I'm sorry, who was a psychonaut, reached these transcendent states through the use of LSD. He also created a technique called holotrophic breath work, where you could breathe into a paper bag. And what you effectively doing were breathing into the carbon dioxide that was already expelled by your body. So you suffer from oxygen deprivation, and that would also bring you into an altered state of consciousness. So there's lots of ways to do it. Some teenagers play what's called a choking game, which is very dangerous because you can literally kill yourself. But you cut off the blood flow to the brain, and you can also achieve an altered state if you don't kill yourself. So during the experience, if you measure brain activity with an EEG cap or an fMRI or any of these other devices, the default mode network of the brain, what you just experienced during that meditation, is totally shut down. There is no brain signals. There is nothing occurring in the neocortex and the cortex of the brain. And yet, when you return to a normal waking state, then the signals reoccur. So I would like to describe to you what it's like to experience the state. First, by Christoph Koch. Christoph is a neuroscientist, a brain scientist. He was a chief scientist at the um, Allen Brain Mind Institute in Seattle, Washington. I believe as of about a year ago, they had 750 PhDs working on different aspects of mind, brain, and consciousness. And he had a psychedelic experience on a beach in Brazil a few years ago. Um, he was totally into materialism, that consciousness was created by the brain, until he had this experience with psilocybin. And here's an excerpt from the book he wrote called Then I Am Myself the World. It's a book that's only about 2 years old. It's a great book. If you're interested in learning more about the nature of consciousness, I highly recommend it. It's easy to read, it's very profound. But in chapter 1, here's his experience of transcendence. I cease to exist in any recognizable way, shape, or form. No more Christoph, no more ego, no more self, no memories, dreams, desires, hopes, fears. Everything personal was stripped away. Nothing was left but non-self. This remaining essence wasn't a man, woman, child, animal, spirit, or anything else. It didn't want anything, expect anything, think anything, remember anything, dread anything, but it experienced, did it ever? It saw a point of cold white light of unbearable intensity, unable even to conceive of looking away, as there was no away from. There was no left or right, up or down, front or back, far away or close by. There wasn't a black canvas on which the light existed, as there was no space. There were no outside attributes, no color, no motion, no texture, no sound or silence, no smell, no body, no pleasure, no pain. What there was a timeless universe, convulsed to a blazing, icy light. That and a profound feeling of both terror and ecstasy. The awfulness of pure experience lasting indefinitely, for there was no perception of time. The experience wasn't brief or long, it simply was. Now, that is the best explanation of an egoless self that I have ever heard. And this led him on a journey also to really question his beliefs. He no longer believes that consciousness is now a result of a certain level of complexity in the brain that creates consciousness. And he's much more inclined to be sympathetic with a metaphysics called idealism, where consciousness is fundamental in the universe. This next one is a personal experience from yours truly. I recently had an opportunity to have a transcendent experience, and I took it. And this, after I returned, the experience was so profound for me. I'm not a person who writes poetry, but I wrote this as a result of describing my experience. Let me just read it first and I'll talk about it a little bit. All perceptions and imaginations cannot describe that which can only be experienced, the ecstasy and the terror of it, a peak of divine essence, beyond imagination, more real than real, timeless and boundless, the oneness of what we are, unlimited in knowing, pure in bliss and in unconditional love, nothing and everything, and yet the essence of all that exists. So I probably wrote this within the first 24 hours after I came back. It's impossible to describe what I experienced. There are no words for it. But two things stand out in my mind that I'd like to talk about. One is the sense of unconditional love, a love that was so profound that it brought tears to my eyes. I can't explain it. Nothing in my entire life that I can ever recall, from being a small child to the present moment, ever came close to the experience of that unconditional love. Um, the other thing that I really left an impact on me was the experience, the perception. What it wasn't perception because my eyes were closed, but the more real than real. The colors, the shapes, whatever was perceived in my mind was so vivid and so real that it was way beyond anything that you experience in this reality. Um, the other things, it was ecstatic and it was also, terrorizing at the same time. The vertigo of eternity is what Bernardo Kastrup calls it. So it's something that there are not words. It's ineffable. No words to describe it. It's something you have to experience for yourself. And again, whether it's somebody who has a near-death experience, has surgery through the standstill surgery that I mentioned before, or some of the other things we talked about in earlier sessions, um, it's way beyond anything that can be described in words. So, okay. So how does this happen? Um, Well, I don't know how it happens, but this is a chart that illustrates how our subjective experience um, basically works by association. And not only experience, but also memory works the same way. We have an experience, and as we talked about before, you can't separate the experience you're having from the interpretation of the experience. And when we talk about integrated information technology probably in the next class, um, we'll talk about why that is. But basically, what the mind wants to do is maximize the integrated information in every moment possible. So when you perceive something, you immediately slap an interpretation on with it based on prior experience, beliefs, and other things, and you can't separate the two. So we don't see things as they actually are. We see things as the way we are. But the experience with the interpretation will create a thought. The thought may stimulate an emotion, and these are all the self-excitations that we talked about before. And the emotions may stimulate a memory. And again, the memory is not the reality that we perceived when we had an earlier experience. It's the perceptual experience with the interpretation that is stored away in our memory. And of course, those memories can give rise to more thoughts and to intentions and then take us back to the original perceptual experience again. You've all had the experience when you're sitting at your desk, let's say you're in front of a computer or you're in a chair reading a book, and the next thing you realize is you're up and you're walking into the kitchen to get a drink of water, and you do not recall having the intention to get up and go get a drink of water. Well, how does that occur? Because most neuroscientists would now say that we have a lot of cognitive complexes running in parallel in our brain. The only one we pay attention to is the one that has the highest integrated information at any moment in time, but the others are all there. And if a thought or an emotion or a memory triggers something, it can cause our minds to switch from one cognitive complex to another, through self-excitation. And that's how we find ourselves doing something without ever having given it any conscious thought. So it turns out that memory works the same way. And for example, as I get older, sometimes I have trouble remembering a person's name or even remembering a word. I know it, and, I put it in the back of my mind, and 30 seconds later, or maybe 30 minutes later, all of a sudden, um, the thing I was trying to remember pops back up into my conscious awareness. Well, how did that happen? All the memories are there. Everything that happened to you since you were uh, a baby is in memory somewhere. What's gone, what may be erased in some cases, is the associations that are necessary for the recall of the memories. And you've probably all had the experiences where um, sometimes you're just randomly thinking, your mind is wandering, and all of a sudden something occurs to you that you haven't thought about for many, many years. Where did that come from? Well, some association triggered the memory in your mind. So I would submit to you that just like neuroscience can't tell us how consciousness is generated by brain, the so-called hard problem of consciousness, that's only true because of the materialist paradigm that says that consciousness is a result of brain processes. Well, memory works the same way. There's not a neuroscientist anywhere that can tell you where memories are stored in the brain. It's much like the TV set. If the circuitry that controls the audio signal so you can hear the programming associated with the TV session that you're watching. If the audio circuitry goes out, um, you know, you don't affect the programming in the studio, right? That's happening somewhere else. It's not happening in the computer circuitry. And that's the filter theory of the brain that basically consciousness is way beyond the brain and memory is too. Okay, one of the things that most people confuse and conflate the two is consciousness versus intelligence. Um, if we look on this scale, on the horizontal axis, we have on the very left, low on the horizontal axis, no intelligence, all the way up to here's extreme intelligence. And what do I mean by intelligence? Problem solving. It's algorithmic, it's computational, it's processing symbols, it's doing something. Consciousness is different from that. Consciousness is a state of being. And this is the vertical, oops, sorry. It's a state of being on the vertical axis from very little consciousness to an extreme amount of consciousness on the top of the vertical arrow. So here's an amoeba. Amoebas build little mud houses from the mud in the bottom of a pond that they live in. They will be attracted to food and they'll move away from danger. Obviously, they don't have any metaconsciousness. And here's a jellyfish that has about 10,000 neurons. An amoeba has none. It's a single-celled organism. You get up to a bee. That S is a mistake. I don't know why that's there. Sorry about that. But anyways, you get up to a bee, which has about 1 million neurons. And, it can communicate with other bees in the hive. So you've probably heard as the waggle dance. That's how it, can convey to other bees in the hive where the best honey is near the hive. You get up to a mouse with 75 million neurons, a dog with 550 million. By the time you get to a mouse and a dog, mice and dogs can plan, evaluate, and solve problems to some extent. They're limited in their ability to do it. And then you get up to a human being, which has 85 billion neurons in the brain. Vastly more complex than any other organism, except maybe whales and dolphins. And they may be on the consciousness scale just as intelligent as human beings are, if not more so. I have two other pictures on this chart. This is a supercomputer. A supercomputer is great at problem solving, at manipulating symbols and solving computational problems through some kind of program algorithms. it's doing something, it's manipulating symbols, but its level of consciousness, it's the nature of the experience it's having while it's doing that is zero. It is not conscious. And I'll have more to say about that in a minute. On the other hand, this on the top left axis is an organoid. Scientists are now able to take stem cells from brains and reproduce neurons, and they've been able to, in a culture, we'll talk about this next week in more detail, about anywhere from 1 million to 10 million neurons interconnected in a petri dish, pure consciousness. It has no sensory perceptions yet, but that'll probably be coming in the next several years or so. But it has a high degree of consciousness. It feels things, but no ability to problem solving, no computational abilities. So the thing to remember from this chart is I'm not talking about problem solving, manipulating symbols, analyzing patterns and things like that. Computers are far better than that, and that's why AI has become such a big thing recently. But AI is not conscious. It's not aware of what it's doing. It has no ideas what the symbols it's manipulating means. Okay. So, a little bit more detail on what I mean by intelligence. Remember, pure consciousness is, what does something feel like? The smell of a rose, the redness of a strawberry, the taste of garlic, the feeling of love, the feeling of the beauty of a sunset. All those things are experiences that we do not know how to create in computers, no matter how smart they are, how powerful they are. So intelligence is computational, it's algorithmic, it's manipulating symbols. So it's creative in a sense because it can uncover patterns that are too complex for an ordinary human being to cover. So in that sense, it's creative, but it's not creative like human beings are. And basically, when an AI system is coming up with answers, it's using statistical probabilities to figure out what word comes next in a sentence when it's trying to come up with an answer to a question that you asked it. It has no understanding of what it is that it just information that it just gave you. So I just want to put this up here because next week we're going to talk a little bit about artificial intelligence and why artificial intelligence will never be conscious, at least not in a digital computer. I imagine that someday when we are able to develop biological computers, they may become conscious, but that's a whole nother story. But just to compare the complexity of the human brain to a digital computer, I mentioned before that a typical adult human brain has 85 billion neurons. Each neuron has axons and dendrites, inputs and outputs, and there are about 50,000 input each to each neuron in the brain and 50,000 outputs. Okay, and on top of that, these input signals, each one of these 50,000 signals can be inhibitory or enabling. And they're analog. In other words, they can have a value between 0 and 1 in a continuous range. They are not just either 0 or just 1 like a digital computer. And just for comparison, here's a modern digital circuit. Each one of these symbols represents an AND gate or an OR gate, which is depicted down here. So a typical gate has only 1 or 2 outputs as opposed to 50,000. It may have 3 inputs and 1 or 2 outputs. So the level of complexity, the difference is immense. Okay. So I put that in here because I was talking about Intelligence versus consciousness. Computers are intelligent, but they're not conscious. And we'll have a lot more to say about that next week. So, before I go any further, um, anybody have any questions about anything I've covered so far?
What was the animal in the chart that you had at the top of consciousness, but it didn't have any intelligence?
Oh, that's an organoid.
Okay.
An organoid. We'll talk more about that next week because even worse than organoids is they've connected organoids to digital computers to compensate for the intelligence that the organoids don't have. So there are now devices that you can buy that are a combination of an organoid and a digital computer circuitry together. We'll talk more about that next week. But anyways, the whole issue of ethics, if something is conscious, if it can suffer, you don't want to pull the plug on it because you're killing a conscious organism. You pull the plug on an AI system, so what? It's just a fancy computer with a tremendous computational capability, but it has no level of consciousness. There are actually people running around right now worrying about the ethics of unplugging an AI system. Nothing to worry about, as we'll talk about more next week. So, okay. So why are we conscious? And I think, well, from a point of view of a living being, you know, um, it offers inhibitors and drivers. We seek pleasure, joy, and happiness. We move away from pain, fear, suffering, anguish, and for lower organisms, there's no metacognition. There's no thinking about those things. They're instinctual, or archetypal. There are beliefs that are inbred in the organism and things that just happen. There are instinctual choices that are made, but there's no conscious, self-reflective thought involved in it. Metacognition, which is a higher level of consciousness for organisms with a brain, certainly mice and organisms above that, cats, dogs, and people, use metacognition to assign meaning to experience. That's a big one because, an AI system doesn't know, it's just manipulating symbols. It has no understanding, no meaning behind what it's doing. Metacognition in different organisms vary by degree. Obviously, the metacognition in a mouse is not the same as a human being, is not the same as what's in a dog. And with metacognition, we can balance inhibitors and drivers. Sometimes we will take short-term pain for long-term pleasure. There's always a trade-off that we can make. And with metacognition, we have the ability to reason, to evaluate, analyze, and plan. And we have agency. In other words, we can make conscious choices, not just instinctual choices. Human beings have all the above. They have the subjectivity and also the metacognition. So we, in some sense, you could say with metacognition, have free will, and that's probably true up to a point. Okay, so here's another chart that I showed. I think I showed you this earlier, but here's the degree of consciousness. We're going up the vertical axis is a higher degree of consciousness. The horizontal axis is complexity of life. And you can see certainly single-celled organisms display a simple degree of consciousness, and then you get clusters of certain fungi, and you go up the chain to jellyfish and invertebrates, and then higher invertebrates, and then vertebrates, mammals. At some point, you cross a line from phenomenal consciousness, which is pure instinctual or archetypal behavior, to behavior that's controlled by as much by metacognition and self-reflection. Okay, and who knows if there's anything beyond human beings that maybe even have a higher degree of consciousness and a higher level of complexity than human beings. This distinction between phenomenal consciousness or pure subjectivity or pure experience and metacognition, self-reflection, is going to be very important when we get to the metaphysics of consciousness and we talk about consciousness as the most fundamental aspect of the universe. Because what I'm talking about with cosmic consciousness is the phenomenal consciousness, the pure subjectivity and the pure experience, not self-reflective consciousness, which is evolved through organisms, living organisms having a brain. And by the way, as I said once before, anything that's conscious is synonymous with being alive. Is it alive? It's conscious to some degree. If it's not alive, probably not conscious. Okay. I'd like to end with this is a 5-minute video by Bernardo Kastrup. I think I've mentioned Bernardo before, but I just want to show 2 books. That he wrote. He's written about 14 books right now. He's very prolific. He has 2 PhDs, one in computer engineering, focusing in artificial intelligence. And because of that, that's how he got interested in consciousness. Then he went back and got a second PhD in philosophy. Because let me stop sharing for a second before we show the video. You can see this book, Why Materialism is Baloney. You know, a materialist would say that consciousness is a result of brain processes. The brain dies, consciousness dies. You know, the consciousness as fundamental philosophy has been around for 3,500 years, mostly in the Far East, in the Indus Valley, and in the India and Pakistan and Afghanistan and places like that. But in its modern format, it appeared in Germany about 200 years ago. Consciousness is fundamental as opposed to materialism. And that's where we're heading to. Here's another book that's a summary of everything that Bernardo talks about why he believes that materialism is not the way reality is, that consciousness is what's fundamental in the universe. He's become extremely popular. He used to be debated all the time. Nobody will debate him anymore because he wins all the debates. So let's go back let's watch his video for about 10 minutes. He's a very, very smart guy. He's got all kinds of videos on YouTube. If you ever run across one of his videos, I'm sure you'd find it fascinating. Okay, everybody can see the share screen again? Okay, here's Bernardo.
Experience without metaconsciousness is conscious experience that you have, you experience it, but you may not explicitly know that you are experiencing it. For instance, you're always experiencing your breathing, the inflation of your rib cage and deflation, the movement of your diaphragm, the sensation of air flowing in and out of your nostrils. But only when you pay attention to your breathing do you become metaconscious of the experience of breathing, even though you are experiencing breathing all the time. Another example that speaks to me because I'm prone to this, I can have the experience of pain without knowing that I am having the experience of pain. So these are instances in which you have experience that is not metaconscious. It is conscious, like every experience, but it is not metaconscious. In other words, you are experiencing it, but you don't know that you are experiencing it. Now, to know that you are having a certain experience, you need at least 2 things. 1, you need to be having the experience. And 2, you need to re-represent that experience cognitively. There arises a meta experience, also called a re-representation in your mind, that points to the original experience. Every time you report an experience to yourself or to others, like if you're in the hospital and you tell your nurse, I'm having a big toe pain, what you are actually reporting is not the toe pain. What you're reporting is the re-representation at a metacognitive level of that experience of pain. So re-representation creates a sort of a copy of the experience in a higher level of cognition, a higher level of abstraction that is amenable to reporting. It's amenable to being used within the context of language constructs, conceptual contexts, webs of meaning and semantics. So metacognition is a higher level mental function, tightly connected with attention. There are some who say they are the same thing. Attention and metacognition is the same thing. I think the jury is still out on that, but it's at least very tightly related to attention. And it's a higher level mental function, meaning that less evolved living beings on planet Earth, even though they are surely conscious, even though they surely experience, they are unlikely to meta experience. They are unlikely to be able to tell themselves, I am having this experience. Because to tell yourself that you're having an experience, you have to recognize yourself as a subject, in some sense, separate from your experiences. That's why we say, I have pain, as opposed to I am pain. Because if you're not metacognizant, then the experience of pain is what you are. It's the only thing that you have. So to metacognize an experience, you have to sort of step out of it as a subject that is in some sense distinct from the experience, and then report that experience to yourself as a subject. And that's why you say, I have pain, as opposed to I am pain. My cat, a less evolved living being, does not report to himself, I have pain. My cat lives the pain if he is in pain. He is that pain for as long as the pain is going on. So what I'm trying to argue is that metacognition is the result of evolution through the pressures of natural selection. It's not there as an inherent property of mind, as an inherent property of subjectivity from the get-go. It is certainly an inherent potentiality of mind. It's something that can arise in mind. But I think it has a reason through evolution and the laws of natural selection. Otherwise, my cat would be metaconscious. So would an amoeba swimming in my toilet. So would a mosquito, a bee, a grasshopper in my backyard, my apple tree. They would all be metacognizant if we say that metacognition is there from the get-go. It's woven into the very fabric of subjectivity, of consciousness. I think we have overwhelming evidence that it's not, that metacognition is a certain configuration of subjectivity that arises later as a higher level mental function because of the pressures of natural selection. Yeah, that summarizes it.
Okay, I hope he was able to do a good job describing what metacognition is versus having an experience. Because when you just have an experience, you are the experience. When you metacognize it, you self-reflect and you're replaying the experience back almost after the fact, the way he described it. So anyways, that's the difference between the two. So anybody have any questions about that? The difference between pure subjectivity, pure experience, and metacognition are going to be fundamental as we get into the metaphysics of consciousness, and we talk about it as opposed to materialism. So Um, I don't want to go any further than that tonight. I'll just take a few questions. I think, Martha, you were about to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to say, so metacognition, in simple words, would be just the awareness of our own thoughts, right? And how different is that from just plain cognition? There is no awareness in cognition.
Yeah, I think I missed one of the words you said that was critical. I'm not sure, but there's experience. What is the smell of a rose? And then there's thinking about the experience of smelling a rose. The thinking about the experience of smelling the rose is something that takes place only in metacognition. And when a simple organism that doesn't have metacognition, let's say, experiences pain, it becomes the pain. As he said, it doesn't think, oh, my big toe is hurting right now. It becomes the pain in the big toe. With metacognition, there's also the recognition, oh, that I am experiencing a pain in my big toe. It's like you're separating yourself from the experience of having the pain. That's what metacognition allows you to do. It's like you're almost instantaneously replaying the experience in your mind, applying symbols to it, and separating your pure subjectivity from the experience itself. I hope that helps.
To reach to those levels of awareness, it's like we have to be constant. It's like a 24/7 reflection on our experiences, right? That's what I'm trying to see. How do we reach those levels of metacognition?
Well, I mean, just because you have a human brain with 85 billion neurons, well, again, if you believe in the filter theory of consciousness and that the brain acts as a filter or reducing valve for reality and is not the generator of consciousness, but it is the generator of metacognition. It allows us to, quote, replay the tape of whatever the experiences that we're having and evaluate and analyze it and report it. Unlike simpler creatures, they just have the experience of whatever it is that is occurring, but they can analyze, evaluate, and plan based on the experience they're having. They're just become the experience.
So I guess I'm trying to, how do we really reach that level of metacognition? And what do you think at night when we go to sleep? Before we go to sleep, it's like we do a review of our.
Oh, excellent question. Yeah, well, the first part of the question, you get metacognition by default because you have a human brain with 85 billion neurons, each with 50,000 inputs and outputs. You can do the math and you find out that there's almost a trillion interconnections. And then if you add on the fact that the electrochemical signaling in each one of those inputs and outputs is variable. It's not either on or off. The possibilities are even tens of trillions. So we get it by default. But when you sleep, you lose metacognition. And when you wake up, you replay your dreams metacognitively. And then you experience whatever was happening in the dream. You're not analyzing and planning. You're just experiencing in the dream itself. You're not pretty much not metacognitive when you're dreaming. You revert back to the pure subjective experience of whatever it is. You're not analyzing, planning, or evaluating anything. You're just experiencing it.
So metacognition is simply just kind of thinking and rationalizing and analyzing and all the monkey mind, what we call the monkey mind.
Right. It requires a higher level and it requires memory because you have to re-represent the experience symbolically to describe it. And by the way, we're the only creatures on the planet that can describe it to somebody else. And that will be very important when we talk about locked-in syndrome, people that are on life support and trying to figure out whether they're conscious or not. We'll get to that in a future session, because how to figure out if somebody is metacognitive or not, even though they can't even blink their eye, is very important because you certainly don't want to pull the plug on somebody who's having conscious experience, even if they can't communicate that they're having it. So the distinction between having an experience and being metacognitive is very important, certainly for those kind of patients, because a lot of them, they hear a discussion in the room between the doctor and the rest of the family about whether or not they should pull the plug on a respirator. And the person could be totally conscious and not able to do anything or contribute to the conversation at all. So anyways, that's why being able to distinguish whether somebody is conscious or literally not aware of their surroundings is important, because a lot of time they're locked in. They have no motor control, not even able to blink their eye. So obviously behavior is a great way to tell if something is conscious or not. You ask it to do something, and if it can do it, you assume it's conscious. But if somebody is locked in with no motor control, how do you tell if somebody is conscious? And that's where the state of the art is in neuroscience right now. And it has a lot of practical implications, which we'll talk about later, like even aircraft pilots, where you need to instantaneously control an airplane within a fraction of a second, a supersonic jet plane, or it could crash. Well, they're doing neural links right now to brains by analyzing the brain signals, and rather than having to rely on the much slower physical movements of hands and fingers on controls to manipulate the thing. So Neuralink, Elon Musk has a company called Neuralink that's developing a direct interface to the brain using brain waves to control things external to the person without any motor control. So we'll get into that later on.
Well,
Consciousness is a very vast subject. All of us are conscious. At least I think you're conscious. I know I am. And you behave in ways that I expect I would behave if I was in your situation. So I think you're all conscious. But, just because we know that we're conscious doesn't mean that we're experts on all aspects of consciousness. What it really means. Is it generated by the brain, or is it fundamental in the universe, and everything in the universe is really mental, not physical? We'll talk about that when we get into the metaphysics, comparing materialism and idealism. One metaphysics says that consciousness is a result of brain processes. The other one says, and everything is physical. And the other is idealism that says, no, it's the other way around. Consciousness is fundamental, and everything that you experience or everything that you do is mental in nature. There is no physicality. It's just appearances. So this is a lot to take in, and I'm trying to go slow and make sure that we have a fairly good idea about what some of these words mean. It'll make a lot more sense when we get into the stuff comparing idealism and materialism later on. I think, Rebecca, you will also find that when we get done with this course, when you're watching a video for someone like Donald Hoffman, it'll make a lot more sense once you understand the vocabulary that these people are using. So, anybody have anything else they want to bring up?
I just have a quick question. Are we going to get into like reality being a hologram, or we're not going to go into that? Or the possibility, let's not even say it, but quantum physics is really hinting at that.
Yeah, I don't think reality is a hologram. I think memory is stored holographically. I mean, that's different, but yes, we will get into some of that. I mean, you know, there's so many different directions that we can go into. What I'm trying to do is give you the basics so you have the background to understand why so many scientists and psychonauts and, deep meditators and, ancient Eastern traditions are all saying that we've got it wrong. Consciousness is fundamental. It's not materials, it's not atoms and molecules, and consciousness is a byproduct of, complexity resulting from the interactions of those physical things. Um, you know, you will have the background to go off on your own, hopefully, and understand a lot more about some of the great materials that's on YouTube or on the internet now describing these things. And that's all I can hope for, to sort of point you in the right direction so you can go on off on your own and explore things much deeper than we have time for here. So, but, bring it up if we haven't talked about it by the time we get done, because I would like to do one session where we just have an interactive discussion after we get to the end. So whatever questions you might have on things like that, we can discuss. Okay, so it's 8:25 now. I don't have anything else. Next week, I would like to talk specifically about artificial intelligence, why it cannot be conscious, and we'll talk about organelles, which is the great discovery that's now occurring that should send shivers down our spine, because we might be truly creating alien life that might be more conscious than we are. And it might happen within the century, if the developments keep occurring at the pace they have in the last 10 years or so. And discussion is fascinating. We'll also talk about some of the experiments of Michael Levin at Tufts University, proving that memories do not reside in the brain in his biological laboratory. I might have mentioned it in a previous session, but we'll talk more about it in the future.
So we're now